Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Greet your neighbors. Our invitation today will be given by Beth Weaver.
Let us pray. Dear Lord, we're so grateful for the opportunity to be together in this fellowship, for just the ease with which we're able to get our food, and we're thankful for that blessing. As we look out on the weather, help us to realize that everything will pass, but help us to be grateful for the day that has been granted to us. Give us kindness and goodness and compassion for those who are weak, and grant us good fellowship today, and just be with us to your glory and honor. Amen.
Thank you, Beth. Yeah, the last time I looked at my calendar, it did say April 18th today, didn't it? But from what I understand, you possibly could be running your air conditioning by the weekend. So who knows in Ohio, right? And today is tax day, so if you haven't filed your taxes, you might want to leave now and go do that. Quick thanks to Justin for filling in for me last week. And contrary to what he led you to believe, I did give him more than 37 minutes notice. I think he said he had 37 minutes. He knew a few days in advance. Quick reminder, in the flag project, we're going to kick off our spring pipe marking soon. I took a look at the sign up online, and we have about 13 signed up so far. We'll be looking for about 40 overall. And we'll probably kick that off here in May. So if you can help out with that, please sign up online, or let me know, let Lee King know if you can help with that. It's pretty easy. The spring pipe marking, you just get a set of addresses assigned. You go out and try to find the pipe. It's not necessary to carry around tools or anything. It's just marking the pipe and checking the measurements, and it's a pretty easy job. And if we get more people involved, makes it easier for everybody. So if you can help with that, step up and do that. I thought it was interesting, instead of my day in history, I thought for this weekend, it was once every 33 years that Passover, Easter, and Ramadan fall on the same weekend. So I thought that fit well with our theme of Rotary International, and thinking about others and different traditions and celebrating them. So that was kind of neat. So I'm going to turn it over now to Lynn in the Secretary's group.
Thank you, President Terry. We would like to present a red badge to one of our newer members, Bradley Iantuano. And Bradley is a self-employed accountant. So if you didn't do your taxes, maybe you can just stay after Rotary. Thank you. Beth Weaver has a guest.
My guest today is Pastor Richard Frazier. He's the pastor of Daybreak Community Church, and he's the director of the Wooster Hope Center, and he's also running for pastor.
Thank you. We have a visiting Rotarian we would like to welcome, Wilma Rayner. Wilma is a past president of Orville Rotary Club. And one thing I do need to tell you about her, now listen to this. Wilma by herself has sponsored 43 new members. Amazing. Thank you.
Well, welcome Wilma and Richard to Wooster Rotary. I hope you enjoyed today's program and the Fellowship of Wooster Rotary. Before we introduce our speaker, we do have a classification talk today. So at this time, I'll call Ken Schaefer up to the podium, and Ken's going to give us his classification.
Thank you, President Terry. I just realized I have a blue badge now. And apparently they trust me with the money, so I guess I'm a full member. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what I've done through my career, but I want to spend more time talking to you about what I've done since retirement and how that led me to want to become a Rotarian. My career path started in Worcester and came full circle back to Worcester. I went to St. Louis for my medical training, part of it at St. Louis U and part of it at the Washington University hospitals. I was privileged to have the opportunity to set up a couple of full service cardiovascular programs from scratch. One out in Missouri, in a town about a little bit smaller than Worcester. And then when I came back to Worcester and worked for the Cleveland Clinic, we set up a similar practice here in town. So I retired from practice of medicine 3 years ago. I would describe my practice as being evidence-based. Every medical scientist likes to believe that he's evidence-based, but I also took a lot of pride in taking a pretty holistic view towards medicine. I was that guy, the cardiologist that spends a lot of time with patients, talking to them about lifestyle changes, how to cook, how to shop for food. All through my practice, all through my life, really, I've remained very active in music. I love to be gardening. I love to be outside, cycling. I've done the Great American Trail from Pittsburgh to Washington, D.C., which is a lovely part of that trail. Shortly before retirement, Chris and I decided that we wanted to downsize, and we started looking for property around town where we could have a little bit of access to woods, and where we could build a house that was a little more energy efficient than the one that we were in. We were fortunate to find a lot that's contiguous with Oak Hill. In fact, we're within spitting distance of the Rotary Pavilion there. If you've ever been to the pavilion and take a look over in the woods to the south, you'll see our house there. We decided that we would do a little something different with our landscaping. We had come from this setting here, down close to the college, which was very labor intensive. I was out there like Justin every April 15th with the lawnmower, and there was a lot of work to be done to maintain the orderly gardens. We decided to do a 180, and we went to a more natural landscaping, something that was more sustainable, where we didn't have to use any gasoline-powered equipment outside. We planted rather than a turf grass lawn, planted a meadow full of native grasses and wildflowers. And this is me doing annual maintenance. Once a year, I get out my scythe and cut down the old stems and let things lie on the ground. And the flowers and the native grasses have a tendency to come right back up through them. And the old stuff becomes the mulch for next year's growth. So we have solar panels, got rid of my lawnmower, and started to spend more time doing the things that I loved other than medicine. So 40 years in cardiology is certainly a large part of my life, but I want to talk to you more about what I'm doing now and how that fits into my decision to join Rotary. About the same time we were building our house, I realized that I had really gone from human health to environmental health and from cardiology to being a naturalist. If you're not familiar with a naturalist is, it's a scientist who studies the relationships between the organisms in their environment. So it involves botany, geology, ornithology, you name it. The naturalists don't pretend to be experts in every field. They can't be, but I think this appeals to me because of my tendency to be holistic about things that I'm interested in. I like to study all aspects of things and how they interact. Naturalists, by and large, acknowledge that there's a strong component of education, an obligation to use what knowledge they have accumulated to help educate the public. So you'll see a lot of naturalists doing seminars and nature-related activities at places like the Wilderness Center. Friends of Memorial Park have naturalists come in periodically to do walks and whatnot. And there's also a strong component of activism. So naturalists tend to advocate for the restoration and maintenance of and protection of wilderness populations. So besides the sustainable landscaping aspect of things, I realized that there's not really a place that you can go to get support for things that you want to do in the way of alternatives to landscaping practices. So one of the things that I did was to form a Facebook page called Wooster Native Habitat. And my vision of this was to serve as a forum for people that wanted to post examples of their experiences making changes in the way they approach landscaping, but also to help to encourage people, agencies, municipalities to try to reimagine landscaping in terms of ways that it would be more supportive of wildlife, particularly in the urban centers. We don't think about nature as being something that's around us. We think of it's someplace where you go, like the natural parks. But there's much more potential to establish habitat that supports wildlife if we think of nature as being all around us as well. So in our backyards as well as in the natural parks. I've also joined a lot of Friends of the Parks group. I've done volunteer work at Memorial Park, Oak Hill, Barnes Preserve, Wilderness Center. Those are easy groups to join. It's the kind of thing where you get nominated to the board of Friends of Wooster Memorial Park, and at the annual meeting, they lock the doors so you can't get out. And then once you're on the board, you're on the board for life. I also took the opportunity to become certified as a volunteer naturalist. This is a program that is put on by the OSU Extension Office, similar to the Master Gardener program, where you just begin to look at the scientific knowledge in various areas and how it interacts, get a little bit of background in how to lead hikes, how to speak to groups. I was privileged to be able to be on the strategic planning committee for the Wayne County Parks Board as an at-large member. I also was on the Wilderness Center's strategic planning group, and I've been working with them to develop a certification program for backyard habitat, similar to the Wildlife Foundation's certification. I've been involved with doing some sustainable landscaping projects. Bobby Douglas and I have been working together to develop some sustainable areas of landscaping at the new residential houses for 180 over on Noble Road. And I also had some preliminary work done with James Fox before he left Wayne Center for the Arts. His concept was to incorporate more native plantings into the landscaping around the Art Center. We've also just started to look at doing a renovation of the pollinator garden at Oak Hill next to the pavilion. I had an interest in reforesting Oak Hill Park even before we moved there. I've been aware that the Rotary's been very involved in the park right along. Obviously, the pavilion's been there since the inception of the park. And I became aware of the 100th anniversary project and tracked down Ron Holtman, made him walk around with me. And we looked at the whole park and started talking about the potentials for the park. Even without joining Rotary, I was interested in being involved with what was going on with phase 2 and phase 3 of the project there. But after my talk with Ron, I went back and looked at Rotary International's website, And I was unaware, Ron was unaware, that the International Club has recently adopted environmental protection as being a major cause of the club, the International Club. So this is taken directly from the International Club website. So there's a standing commitment to coming up with projects and implementing them locally as a way of protecting the environment. I just blew past Ron's picture there. Let me see if I can back up to it. I caught Ron planting some trees over there, although he was very And it's easy to see why we wanted to start with trees. Peggy and Ron have both talked at club meetings about the benefits of trees, and I won't belabor that issue here. Needless to say that if you're going to start to incorporate or start to reclaim areas of habitat, trees are your first and most important things to add. I was surprised that I knew that oak trees were good about supporting wildlife, but I was not aware that they can support over 900 species, over 500 species of caterpillars alone. But I think the most important thing about forests, for me anyway, I've always looked at forests as being one of those thin places that people speak of, where you can be still and present and open to the reality of the sacred. Nobody has said that better than Mary Oliver. Here's a quote from her that really describes the concept of forest bathing. It's just spending time to walk slowly and appreciate what's there and be reverent about it. So thank you for letting me talk to you about my interests and why I decided to join Rotary. Again, I think the camaraderie of volunteerism is certainly the main reason why people join a group. But I think for me, equally important is the opportunity to be involved in some programs that could make a difference in terms of protecting the environment. And in closing, I'd just like to encourage the board of this club and members to consider establishing a standing committee to vet and implement projects pertaining to the environmental protection. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ken. It's always good to hear from our new members. I know Ken jumped right in and is helping with the Oak Hill project, and we appreciate your service to the club. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Don Noble to introduce today's speaker.
Thank you, President Terry. Keith Workman is retired with 40 years at Wilbur Company as a machinist and a tool and die maker. In the winter, he and his wife Carol do volunteer work for the Wycliffe Bible translators at their Orlando, Florida campus. In the summer, he does volunteer mowing, ditch cleaning, brush trimming for Rails and Trails of Wayne County, and works 2 days a week at Weep River Leather in Mount Hope. He and his wife have 4 children and 7 grandchildren. Keith is one of the founding members of Rails and Trails of Wayne County. He's former president and currently a trustee with our 27-year-old nonprofit group. Please give a warm Wooster Rotary welcome to my friend Keith as he shares with us some of his insights and stories riding the Great American Rail Trail.
Good afternoon. You can see the map of the developing Great American Rail Trail. And when it's completed, it'll be over 3,700 miles long. And it'll go from Washington, D.C. to the state of Washington on the Pacific coast. You can see it kind of winds back and forth with places that there are already rail trails or that there are abandoned rail corridors that could be converted into rail trails. Currently, it's 53% complete. The eastern part is more complete than the western part. When the Rails to Trails National Organization announced the route in 2019, I looked at what trails they were using, and I realized that I had already ridden all the trails from Washington, D.C. to northwestern Indiana. So I decided that in 2020, I would ride the center section, Illinois, Iowa, and Nebraska. And in 2021, I would ride the western section, Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, and Washington. But then you remember what happened in 2020. And despite COVID, we did decide to go ahead. So I'll highlight some of the trails starting on the East Coast. The trail starts in the Georgetown section of DC and follows the C&O Canal. The C&O is mostly a dry canal bed. It's 185 miles long and goes from DC to Cumberland, Maryland. This is a picture of the Monocacy Aqueduct. It's the largest of any of the aqueducts on the canal. It has 7 arches. Each time the canal would cross a river, it would have an aqueduct like this. In Cumberland, Maryland, then the C&O connects directly to the Great Allegheny Passage. It's commonly called the Gap Trail. On the C&O, there is 1 canal tunnel, and on the Gap Trail, there are 4 former railroad tunnels. This is the Big Savage Tunnel, the longest of the tunnels on the Gap. It's about 3/4 of a mile long, and it's lighted. They spent $12 million refurbishing this tunnel. It had been abandoned for about 30 years. And in order to protect their investment, they put doors on each end of the tunnel. And so from about mid-November till early April, the tunnel is closed. Then the trail goes from Pittsburgh. Well, the Gap Trail is 150 miles long and ends in Pittsburgh. From Pittsburgh, the trail will go across the panhandle of West Virginia to Steubenville, Ohio, and come up towards Massillon. This is the C&O Canal towpath. It's mostly also a dry canal, but at Canal Fulton, there's a section that's watered. And this is a picture of that north of Massillon. The C&O goes all the way to Cleveland, but the Great American Rail Trail will cut off at Clinton and come down through Wayne County, through Marshallville, Orrville, and Apple Creek to Fredericksburg. At Fredericksburg, it'll use the Holmes County Trail and go through Millersburg to Brinkhaven. And then it'll use the Cocosin Gap Trail down to Mount Vernon. At Mount Vernon, this is the Heart of Ohio Trail that goes on towards Columbus. The picture is the Ariel Foundation Park. It was formerly a PPG glass plant. It was abandoned and a brownfield, and the Ariel Foundation went in and created a park out of it. They removed some of the buildings, refurbished some, and this is the smokestack from the former factory. And they put a spiral staircase around it halfway up, and you can go up to the top of that and look out over the park. From Mount Vernon, the trail goes to Columbus, and then it'll go west to Richmond, Indiana, and northwest through Indiana in the direction of Chicago. This is the location of the Erie-Lackawanna Rail Trail in Crown Point, Indiana. It's about 15 miles from the state line. This trail goes 15 miles, 17 miles towards Chicago, and the Great American uses the first 5 miles of it before it cuts off and goes west. It bypasses Chicago through the southern suburbs of Chicago. This is the I&M Canal. I&M stands for Illinois River and Lake Michigan, which the canal connected these two bodies of water for canal transportation. It's also a dry canal. Farther out in Illinois is the Hennepin Canal, and it is a water canal. It was built for transportation, but it's used for recreation now, and it's all still completely watered. This is the bridge that the trail uses to cross the Mississippi River. Underneath the bridge is a lock where the tugboats can push the barges up the river to bypass a shallow section right here. The part at the left is a sidewalk and bikeway where the bicycles can cross from Rock Island, Illinois to Davenport, Iowa. To the right of that, underneath the main bridge, is where the cars and the trucks would cross, and up above is the railroad where the trains cross. If you look closely at the picture, there is a train on the bridge up there when I took the picture. And I can tell you the bridge does shake a little with the movement of the train. In Iowa, this is the High Trestle Trail. It's on the Des Moines River north of Des Moines. And when the railroad bridge was being converted to a bike trail, they hired an architect to design these rectangular structures that cross the pole above the bridge. There's a picture at the left in the daytime, and at night, those structures are lighted, and we were camped near that area, and my wife and I went back that evening and saw the bridge at night. You can bicycle or walk across it. But not everything about my trip was peaches and cream. In addition to leaving during COVID, a week before we left, there was a derecho, 100-mile-an-hour straight line windstorm that came across Iowa and Illinois. And there were 3 different sections of trail, one on the I&M and one at Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and one farther west, where the trees were all down all over the trail. There was no way to get through, and you had to ride the road to get past it. The picture at the left, the yellow sign shows where the trail is supposed to be, but this section is, the trail group is bankrupt. There's no money for maintenance, and the grass was about waist high. The picture at the right is the North Platte River in Nebraska. It's a former railroad bridge, and when I arrived at the bridge, I found it was barricaded. One of the locals told me that there had been an ice jam 2 years before that had come up against the bridge, and they were concerned that the bridge might be damaged, and they blocked it. Prior to my arriving there, there was no signs, no notice, anything that the bridge was closed, and it was 5 miles back to the next road bridge to cross. So I texted my wife to come and pick me up and shuttle me around this bridge. This is the Cowboy Trail in Nebraska. The Cowboy Trail is over 200 miles long, and there are signs that say no vehicles, no cows, no horses. But on the Sunday morning that I was going down the trail, what do I meet but a pickup truck coming down? How do we back up here? Oh, wrong way. Herd of cows coming down the trail towards me. And so while I have the right of way, I'm not riding through a herd of cows. So I pulled off to the side and sat there and waited. The cows also were not very excited about approaching a strange looking person with bright colored clothes on. And so the cowboys turned them, and the cowboys worked them around the side of me on the grass. The picture at the right is also the Cowboy Trail. I knew before I went that there were several bridges that had been washed out, and I would need to ride road sections to get around it. But what I didn't realize was there had been a second flood, and there were now at least 5 bridges that were missing. So I rode out to see what this one looked like, and as you can see, the bridge is completely gone. Bridges cost over $100,000 a piece, and I'm supposing that the Nebraska State Park Commission doesn't have the money quite yet to fund those. Farther west on the Cowboy Trail, this is the Niobrara River Trestle. It's near Valentine, Nebraska. It's the longest trestle on the Cowboy Trail. My wife took this picture from the road nearby, so you can see the length of the trestle. So that was the extent of my 2020 trip. In 21, we went back to ride Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, and Nebraska. But Wyoming has very little of their sections of the Great American done. There's less than 3% of the needed trail. Some of the towns have a section through it, but from town to town, there's hardly any trail. And it'll take them a long time to get theirs open. In Montana, this is Thompson Park near Butte, Montana, 4.5 mile trail of the former Milwaukee rail bed. It crosses the high bridge there in the picture. The picture at the right is the Pipestone Pass Tunnel. The far end of the tunnel is private property, so the trail doesn't start at that end. The trail starts where I'm standing and goes behind where I took the picture. Pipestone Pass is on the Continental Divide. All the water, the rain that would fall east of this would go to the Mississippi River, and all the rain that would fall west of this would go to the Pacific Ocean. In Idaho, this is the Trail of the Coeur d'Alenes. Coeur d'Alenes is an Indian tribe, and they own part of the trail, and the trail is named for their tribe. The railroad, when it was there, went straight across at this lower level, and the bridge was down in that location. The bridge was a rotational bridge that opened and closed for the boats to be able to go through. And the little house up on top was where the man stayed to open and close the bridge. So when the railroad was abandoned, they opened the bridge so that boats could go through. But when the state wanted to make it into a rail trail, they didn't want to have to pay a person to open and close the bridge all the time. So they raised the bridge up in the air, fixed it at that position, and built a ramp up one side and down the other so that the bicycles can cross and the boats can go by underneath. Eastern Washington is basically a desert. It's scab land, it's rock, sand, and even though the state owns most of the abandoned rail bed from the Idaho line to the Columbia River, it's very tough riding. It's more than 100 miles from town to town, and no water available. You have to carry everything you need. This is the Beverly Bridge at the Columbia River. Beverly is the small town on the eastern end of the bridge. And I had dearly hoped I would be able to cross this bridge. It was scheduled to be done by the time I got there. But when I left for the beginning of my trip that year, I realized that they were behind schedule and it was not going to be open by the time I got there. So my wife had to shuttle me 9 miles north to the interstate and across the interstate bridge, which had no bike lane, and back down the other side. I'm happy to report that the Beverly Bridge opened for trail traffic about a week ago and was dedicated. And so now it's open to trail traffic. As we go towards Seattle, Washington, this is the Snoqualmie Tunnel. It's through the Cascade Mountains, underneath the Cascade Mountains, just west of Seattle. The picture at the left is the west entrance to the tunnel. The picture at the right is the east end. It is a straight through tunnel. Some of the railroad tunnels that I was in were curved, but this one is straight through. But it's 2 1/3 miles long. And if I were to walk through it, it would take me well over an hour. I had a good headlight. I chose to ride through, but you can't focus on the light at the end of the tunnel. You have to focus just a few feet ahead of you where your headlight is to try and keep straight. And it's very disorienting. It took me about a half an hour to ride through, and it was probably the longest half hour of my life. Beyond Seattle, you have to take a ferry across Puget Sound, and then you're on the Olympian Peninsula. And this trail is the Spruce Railroad Trail. It starts at Crescent Lake and goes through the Olympian National Forest. It's about 14 miles long and it's paved, and there are 2 short tunnels on it also. It's a very beautiful section. At the western end is the town of La Push. This is where the future end of the trail will be. There's about a mile of trail that goes down into town. La Push is a tribal Indian town with a tribal government and a tribal school. The picture to the left that's the Pacific Ocean behind me. And the picture at the right is some of the offshore islands near the beach there. I was very glad to be able to make this trip and to see the open sections of the trail. My wife shuttled me across the road sections where there was no trail yet. I did not think I'll live long enough to see the entire trail completed. I would say that it would take at least 30 years to get the majority of it done. And I was very glad to be able to see the majority of it while I was still able to ride long distances. On the 2020 section that I rode, I did over 770 miles of trail, and on the western section, I did over 550 miles. If there's any questions, I would attempt to answer them. If not, you can ask me later.
I'd like to commend Keith for his interest in the leisure time activity, which is something I work on my part of swimming. But Keith and I go back a long way. We grew up in the same neighborhood, went to the same church, went to the same high school, and then we went to the same college. And he was a great friend of my brother's, and I commend him for the great job he's doing for leisure time activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry.
It's about 100 miles a day do you average or attempt to average?
I try to ride 40, 45 miles, occasionally longer. That's about my limit for a day. think there was another question over here.
What was the longest day?
The longest day? Oh, I think maybe about 60 miles.
Have a new goal or a new trail or area you want to run?
I took 4 of my grandsons on the CNO and the Gap in 2015, and I've got 2 more grandsons that I'm taking this coming summer, Pittsburgh to DC. It's bike camping, tents, hostels, Adirondack shelters. It's roughing it.
I want to get back.
Oh, and then we're coming back on Amtrak from DC to Cleveland.
Where did you stay along the way?
Campgrounds, we had a pickup truck and a camper that we used on these trips.
With the advent of the electronic bicycle, what are your thoughts about all the Amish and everybody else got their bicycles that today, matter of fact, some rather large Amish women passed 25 miles an hour going up the hill.
Electric bikes are a great thing as you get older. I have one now. It's a way to continue to be able to bicycle as you get older, and it helps to keep you active. There's 3 classes of electric bicycles. There's class 1, which is what I have. You have to pedal before you get any assist. A class 2 has a throttle that you don't have to pedal. You can just pull the throttle, although your battery will run down quicker. And then there's class 3, which goes more than 20 miles an hour, and 20 is the limit on bike paths. So class 1 and class 2 are what are allowed on bike paths. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Keith, for taking us through your rather adventurous trip, especially during COVID. Larry described it as leisure activity. I'm not sure leisure goes along with that, but I'm sure that you saw lots of great scenery along the way, and I appreciate you sharing that with us today. In recognition of your time with us today, I have this rendition of our Rotary wheel. It has our 4-way test on the back, and it's made locally by the Village Network. Couple of quick reminders. Next week, our speaker will be Dr. Norman Jones. He's the Dean and Director of the OSU Mansfield campus. And we'll also have a classification talk from Matt Martin next week. So have a good week, Rotarians. We stand adjourned.